I discovered the petition for guardianship while reviewing my mail at my kitchen table. An elegant cherrywood piece I'd restored myself the previous summer. The legal document, with its official seal and cold, impersonal language, stated that my daughter Elizabeth believed I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. At 67, with my reading glasses perched on my nose and a steaming cup of Earl Grey at my elbow, I felt oddly calm as I read the words that attempted to strip away my autonomy. Perhaps it was the morning sunlight streaming through the windows of the Victorian home I'd lovingly maintained for 40 years. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that after surviving widowhood, breast cancer, and building a renowned architectural restoration business from nothing, this betrayal was simply one more challenge to overcome. The petition had been filed on a Tuesday. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Just 6 days for someone to effectively end my life as an independent woman. 6 days to prove that Catherine Reynolds, recipient of the National Historic Preservation Award, and the woman who had single-handedly saved dozens of landmark buildings across New England, was perfectly capable of making her own decisions. I was adding cream to my second cup of tea when the doorbell rang. Through the beveled glass of my front door, I could see Elizabeth's silhouette, along with what appeared to be 2 other people. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my silver-streaked auburn hair and opened the door to face my only daughter. "Mother," Elizabeth began, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she'd perfected since adolescence. "We need to talk. I've brought Dr. Mitchell and Aunt Susan to help with the discussion." I studied the trio on my porch. Elizabeth, at 42, looked polished as always in her designer pantsuit, not a strand of her highlighted blonde hair out of place. Susan, my late husband's sister, had the decency to look uncomfortable. Dr. Mitchell, whom I'd never met, clutched a leather portfolio and wore the practiced expression of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. "What an interesting coincidence," I said, holding up the guardianship papers. "I was just reading about how concerned you are about my mental faculties. Please come in." They filed into my living room, a showcase of my restoration skills. With its original 1880s moldings, carefully preserved hardwood floors, and the antique furnishings I'd collected over decades, I noticed how Elizabeth's eyes darted around, cataloging items of value as she always did. Dr. Mitchell seemed more interested in observing my movements, while Susan simply looked miserable. "Catherine," Susan began hesitantly, "Elizabeth has been sharing some concerns about you recently." "I'm sure she has," I replied, settling into my favorite wingback chair. "Would anyone care for tea? I just brewed a fresh pot." "Mother, this isn't a social call," Elizabeth interrupted. "We're here because your behavior has become erratic and concerning." I poured myself more tea, allowing the silence to stretch. Years of negotiating with historical boards and skeptical contractors had taught me the power of a strategic pause. "Dr. Mitchell is a geriatric specialist," Elizabeth continued, filling the silence as I knew she would. "He's here to perform an initial assessment." "Is he?" I raised an eyebrow. "How thorough of you to arrange medical care I never requested." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My home in Salem, Massachusetts was more than just a residence. It was a testament to my life's work. When James and I purchased it in 1982, it had been a dilapidated Victorian that most developers wanted to tear down. Instead, we saw potential. In its bones, the solid timber frame, the handcrafted details hidden beneath layers of neglect. I was already establishing my reputation as a historical architect specializing in restoration, and this house became my showcase. Every weekend for 3 years, we stripped paint, repaired plaster, refinished floors, and slowly brought the grand old lady back to life. After James died unexpectedly from a heart attack when Elizabeth was 12, the house became even more significant, a tangible connection to him and the foundation of my expanding business. Reynolds Restoration grew from a one-woman operation to a firm that employed 15 specialists and had a waiting list of clients eager to preserve historical properties throughout the Northeast. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat, drawing me back to the present confrontation. Mrs. Reynolds, your daughter has noted several concerning behaviors: missed appointments, confusion about dates, impulsive financial decisions. Which appointments have I missed, Elizabeth? I asked directly. She shifted in her seat. You weren't at Cousin Janet's baby shower last month. Because I was in Washington, D.C. receiving an award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I sent my regrets and a gift weeks in advance. You've been giving away valuable antiques, she pressed on. The Windsor chairs that belonged to grandmother. I donated them to the Essex Historical Society for their new exhibit on 18th century craftsmanship. They were properly appraised, and I received a tax deduction that my accountant thoroughly documented. Dr. Mitchell made a note in his portfolio. What about the substantial withdrawal from your investment account last quarter? Nearly $300,000 is quite significant. I reached for the intercom panel discreetly installed beside my chair. Margaret, would you please bring in the Danvers Mill portfolio? And perhaps some refreshments for my unexpected guests. Coffee for Dr. Mitchell, black if I recall correctly from your preference card in the medical directory, herbal tea for Susan, who's been avoiding caffeine since her sleep study, and sparkling water for Elizabeth, who's been following that. New alkaline diet she mentioned at Easter. When I released the button, I turned back to face them. You know what fascinates me about historical architecture? The way buildings hold their secrets. Beneath modern drywall, you might find horsehair plaster. Behind vinyl siding often lurks beautiful original clapboard. Nothing is ever quite what it appears to be at first glance. Elizabeth frowned. What are you talking about? I'm simply making conversation while we wait for Margaret. Though I am curious, how did you manage to schedule a competency hearing so quickly? Judge Harriman's docket is usually backed up for months. The stunned expressions on their faces confirmed what I already suspected. They'd assumed I wouldn't discover their legal maneuvers until it was too late. You know about the hearing? Susan whispered. Of course I do. Did you truly believe I wouldn't be notified about a petition that directly concerns me? I've known Judge Harriman for 20 years. Our children attended the same school. His chambers called me personally yesterday. Margaret entered with a professional portfolio case and a tray of beverages. At 38, she had been my executive assistant for nearly a decade, helping me transform Reynolds Restoration from a successful local business into a nationally recognized firm specializing in historically significant buildings. The Danvers Mill documentation, Ms. Reynolds, she said, placing the portfolio on the coffee table. And I've taken the liberty of calling Mr. Abernathy as you requested. He's on his way. Thank you, Margaret. I noted with satisfaction how she'd served everyone exactly what I'd predicted they would prefer. As she left, I opened the portfolio and removed several architectural drawings, photographs, and contracts. The $300,000 withdrawal financed the initial phase of the Danvers Mill restoration, a project that will generate approximately $2 million in revenue over the next 18 months, preserve a pre-revolutionary war structure, and create 37 local jobs. Hardly an impulsive or financially irresponsible decision. Dr. Mitchell reviewed the detailed business plan, his expression shifting from clinical detachment to grudging respect. This is quite comprehensive. It should be. I've completed 63 similar projects over my 35-year career. Elizabeth wasn't ready to concede. What about those random notes we found all over your house last time we visited? Scraps of paper with nonsensical numbers and phrases. Clear signs of cognitive decline. You mean my architectural notations? I extracted a small leather-bound notebook from my cardigan pocket. I've kept field notes this way since graduate school. Each building has its own shorthand, measurements, material specifications, historical references. Any of my colleagues would recognize the system immediately. The doorbell rang again, and moments later, Margaret showed in Harold Abernathy, my attorney for the past 20 years. At 70, with a full head of silver hair and impeccable three-piece suit, he projected exactly the authority the situation called for. "Catherine?" He nodded to me, then surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone who had handled countless family disputes. "I see everyone's here. Excellent. Shall we discuss the legal ramifications of filing for guardianship under false pretenses?" "Harold," I gestured to the empty chair beside me. "Thank you for coming so quickly." I believe Dr. Mitchell was just about to explain on what medical basis he's prepared to testify about my competency without ever having examined me. The doctor closed his portfolio. "I haven't formed any definitive opinions yet. This was meant to be a preliminary consultation." "Yet you were planning to appear at Monday's hearing," Harold noted. "Interesting professional approach." Elizabeth stood abruptly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "This is ridiculous. Mother, we're trying to help you before you make decisions you'll regret. The business is clearly becoming too much for you to handle alone." I regarded my daughter carefully. Elizabeth had always been bright and ambitious, graduating with honors from business school and quickly climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious financial firm. But the economic downturn had hit her hard. Her recent divorce from Thomas had been messy and expensive, and her relocation from Boston back to Salem had come with a significant decrease in salary. "This isn't about my competency," I said quietly. "It's about Reynolds Restoration and its assets, isn't it?" Susan gasped softly. "Elizabeth, you said this was about Catherine's health and well-being." My daughter's silence was confirmation enough. "I think we should address the actual issue here," I continued. "Elizabeth, you're facing financial difficulties following your divorce and career change. Instead of discussing this with me directly, you've attempted to gain control of my business and assets through legal manipulation. That's not..." she began, but Harold interrupted. "Actually, we have evidence suggesting exactly that," he said, removing several documents from his briefcase. "Multiple inquiries to the company's bank about signatory authority. Conversations with potential buyers about Reynolds Restoration's client list and proprietary restoration techniques. Even a draft listing for this house with Brighton Realty." The color drained from Elizabeth's face. "How did you get those?" "Your mother has many friends in this community," Harold replied simply. "People who respect what she's built and were concerned by your sudden interest in liquidating her life's work." I felt an unexpected wave of sadness watching my daughter's schemes unravel. Where had I gone wrong? James and I had raised her with values of honesty and integrity. We'd emphasized the importance of preservation, not just of buildings, but of relationships and trust. "Elizabeth," I said gently, "if you needed financial help, why didn't you simply ask?" "Because you would have made me work for it," she snapped. "Some apprenticeship or role in the company. You never just give anything freely." The truth of her words stung because they contained a kernel of truth. I did believe in earning one's way. My own parents had lost everything in a business failure. When I was young, forcing me to pay my own way through college and graduate school. That experience had shaped my approach to life and to parenting. "You're right," I acknowledged. "I do believe in the value of work, but I would never have left you struggling." Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps this is a family discussion that should continue privately. I don't believe my services are needed here." "Actually, Doctor," Harold interjected, "we'll need a statement from you confirming that you have no evidence of any cognitive impairment in Mrs. Reynolds, for the court record." The doctor nodded, clearly eager to distance himself from the situation. "I'll have my office send it over this afternoon. Mrs. Reynolds appears to be thoroughly competent in all respects." As Dr. Mitchell excused himself, Susan moved to sit closer to me. Catherine, I'm so sorry. Elizabeth told me you'd been forgetting things, making dangerous mistakes with the house renovations. I should have spoken to you directly. Yes, you should have, I agreed, but without rancor. Susan had always been easily influenced, especially by those with strong personalities like Elizabeth. But I understand loyalty to family. Elizabeth remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. So what happens now? You expose me at the hearing? Humiliate me in front of the entire community? That depends entirely on you, I replied. Harold will file a motion to dismiss the petition immediately. If you sign a statement acknowledging that your concerns were unfounded, the matter ends there. And if I don't? Harold adjusted his glasses. Then we proceed to the hearing where we present evidence of your attempts to defraud your mother, potentially resulting in legal consequences beyond the dismissal of your petition. Elizabeth's professional composure finally cracked. You don't understand. I've lost everything. The house in Boston, half my retirement in the divorce settlement. My new position pays barely enough to cover rent. I was desperate. For the first time, I saw past my daughter's perfect exterior to the frightened woman beneath. In her vulnerability, she reminded me of myself at a much younger age. After James died, when I'd faced raising a child alone while keeping a fledgling business afloat. Sit down, Elizabeth, I said softly. There's another option we haven't discussed. She hesitated, then returned to her seat, careful to maintain her dignity despite her emotional outburst. Reynolds Restoration has needed a business operations director for some time, I continued. Margaret is brilliant with client relations and project coordination, but financial strategy isn't her strength. The position would come with a competitive salary and performance-based equity options after 2 years. Elizabeth's expression shifted from defeat to cautious interest. You're offering me a job after this? I'm offering you an opportunity to earn what you need, I clarified. The position is real, the work is demanding, and you would report to me like any other employee. Your business degree and corporate experience would be valuable assets, but you would need to learn the specifics of historic preservation and renovation from the ground up. Susan looked between us anxiously. Catherine, are you sure about this? No, I admitted. But I'm willing to give Elizabeth the chance to prove herself professionally rather than resorting to legal manipulations. Harold was already drafting a document on his tablet. I'll prepare an agreement that includes the withdrawal of the guardianship petition, terms of employment, and explicit acknowledgement that any future attempts to challenge Catherine's competency without substantial medical evidence would result in immediate termination. Elizabeth studied me with new awareness, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Why would you do this? Why not just cut me off completely? I thought about the Victorian house around us, how it had been damaged but not destroyed. When we found it, how beneath the decay had been a structure worth saving. Because restoration is what I do, I answered simply. I look at damaged things and see their potential to be whole again. The conversation continued for another hour, with Harold outlining the specific terms of both the legal agreement and the employment offer. Susan, relieved that family conflict had been averted, offered to help Elizabeth move from her expensive apartment to a more affordable option closer to Salem. After they left, I sat alone in my study, the former library, of the Victorian with its original built-in bookshelves and window seat overlooking the garden. Margaret brought me a fresh cup of tea and waited silently, knowing I would speak when ready. That went better than expected, I finally said. Do you really think Elizabeth can change? Margaret asked, her concern evident. I considered the question carefully. My daughter had revealed a willingness to betray me that couldn't be easily forgotten. Yet I'd also glimpsed something familiar in her desperation, the fierce determination to survive that had carried me through my own darkest times. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I believe in giving people the tools to restore themselves. The rest is up to them. As evening fell, I reviewed the plans for the Danvers Mill project, losing myself in the familiar comfort of architectural drawings and historical specifications. The 1740s structure had weathered nearly 3 centuries of New England seasons, enduring storms, neglect, and multiple renovations that had stripped away much of its original character. Yet beneath the aluminum siding and dropped ceilings, the essential structure remained sound. With careful attention and skilled craftsmanship, it would stand for centuries more. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "I've signed the papers. Harold sent. Starting Monday." I typed back, 8 km sharp. "Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. First stop is the mill site for an orientation to the project." Her response came quickly. "I'll be there." Whether this marked a new beginning or simply another chapter in our complicated relationship remained to be seen. But I knew one thing with certainty. At 67, I was not finished building, not finished restoring, and certainly not ready to relinquish control of the life I had so carefully constructed. The guardianship hearing would be dismissed without fanfare, becoming merely another challenge overcome in a life that had seen many. And Elizabeth would discover, as countless clients had before her, that Catherine Reynolds was not someone whose competence should ever be underestimated. Setting my work aside, I walked through my home, running my fingers along the banister I'd stripped and refinished myself, straightening a picture frame containing my first architectural award, and finally, pausing at the large bay window that overlooked Salem's historic district. In the distance, I could see the illuminated spire of the old town hall, a building my firm had restored 5 years earlier, bringing it back from near condemnation to its current glory. Some might have seen the guardianship attempt as a betrayal, too severe to forgive. But my years of working with historical structures had taught me an important lesson. Nothing of value is ever beyond salvaging if you're willing to see past the damage to the fundamental structure beneath. Buildings, businesses, and yes, even relationships could be restored with the right combination of expertise, patience, and vision. Monday would come, and with it, the true test of whether my daughter could be rebuilt into someone worthy of eventually carrying on my legacy. I didn't know if it was possible, but I knew that the attempt itself honored everything I stood for, both as a restoration expert and as a mother who had never given up on seeing the potential beneath the surface. The morning of what would have been the guardianship hearing dawned with a clarity typical of early autumn in New England. I rose at 5, following the routine that had served me well for decades. After a brisk shower and a light breakfast, I dressed in what James had always called my battle armor, a tailored charcoal suit with subtle crimson accents, pearl earrings he'd given me on our 10th anniversary, and the vintage Cartier watch that had been my grandmother's. Standing before the mirror, I saw not the elderly woman in decline described in Elizabeth's petition, but the same determined architect who had fought her way through a male-dominated industry, who had rebuilt her life after widowhood, and who had transformed neglected buildings into treasured landmarks. Harold called at 7 with confirmation that Elizabeth had officially withdrawn her petition. Judge Harriman had dismissed the case and sealed the records, a professional courtesy that would protect both my reputation and Elizabeth's from community gossip. The legal threat had been neutralized, but the deeper damage to our relationship remained to be addressed. At precisely 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Elizabeth stood on my porch wearing pressed jeans, a button-down shirt, and boots that appeared brand new. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a leather messenger bag rather than her usual designer purse. "Good morning," I said, stepping out and locking the door behind me. "We'll take my car." The drive to Danvers Mill took 20 minutes, during which Elizabeth studied the project portfolio I'd prepared. Budget projections, architectural plans, historical documentation, and timeline milestones. She asked no questions, but I noticed her businesswoman's eye lingering on the profit margins and investment recovery schedules. The mill itself stood as a testament to both neglect and endurance. Situated beside a small river that had once powered, Its operations, the massive timber-framed structure had survived nearly 3 centuries, its weathered clapboards and broken windows belying the solid bones beneath. "This is a $1-2 million project?" Elizabeth asked skeptically as we approached, her designer boots already gathering dust from the unpaved access road. "When we're finished, this property will be worth nearly $4 million, I replied, unlocking the padlock on the temporary construction fence. The main building will house a museum dedicated to early American industry on the ground floor, with offices for a historical society and environmental nonprofit on the upper levels. The smaller outbuildings will become artisan workshops and a visitor center." Inside, the cavernous main floor was a maze of massive support beams, rusted machinery, and debris accumulated over decades of abandonment. Early morning light filtered through broken windows, illuminating dust motes and revealing glimpses of the building's former grandeur. "It looks hopeless," Elizabeth murmured, carefully sidestepping a fallen timber. "That's what most people see at first," I acknowledged, leading her toward a section where restoration had already begun. "But look here." I pointed to a massive central beam where layers of grime had been carefully removed to reveal hand-hewn oak with the original carpenter's marks still visible. This building was constructed by craftsmen who intended it to last for generations. They used techniques and materials that have survived nearly 300 years of use, abuse, and neglect. Our job isn't to replace what they created, but to uncover it, repair what's damaged, and make it functional for today while honoring its original purpose. Elizabeth ran her fingertips over the exposed beam. "How can you tell what's worth saving and what needs to be replaced?" "Experience," I said simply, "and a willingness to look deeper than the surface." For the next 2 hours, I walked her through the site, explaining the restoration process from assessment to completion. I introduced her to Carlos, my master, carpenter of 15 years, and his team who were carefully removing layers of aluminum siding added in the 1970s to reveal the original clapboards beneath. "Many of these can be saved," Carlos explained, demonstrating how they carefully pried each board to minimize damage. "We'll replace only what's too far gone, using period-appropriate materials and techniques." By mid-morning, we were joined by Lydia Chen, the project architect who had worked alongside me for the past 8 years. At 35, she represented the future of Reynolds Restoration, brilliant, meticulous, and sharing my passion for preserving historical structures. "Ms. Reynolds," she greeted me with her usual professionalism before turning to Elizabeth with barely concealed curiosity. "And you must be Elizabeth. Your mother speaks of you often." "Does she?" Elizabeth replied, clearly surprised. "Of course," Lydia said, spreading detailed drawings across a makeshift table. "She mentioned you studied business administration and finance. We could certainly use that expertise as this project moves forward." I watched Elizabeth's expression shift from defensive wariness to cautious interest as Lydia detailed the financial and logistical challenges specific to historical restoration. Unlike new construction with its predictable materials and standard procedures, each restoration project presented unique puzzles that required flexibility, creativity, and rigorous attention to detail. The grant funding covers approximately 40% of the project, Lydia explained, pointing to her meticulously organized budget. But it comes with strict requirements for historical accuracy and documentation. Every change from the original plans requires approval, which can delay work for weeks. "What about tax credits?" Elizabeth asked, her financial mind engaging with the problem. "Historic properties qualify for federal rehabilitation tax credits, plus Massachusetts has additional state incentives." Lydia looked impressed. "Exactly. But navigating the application process is complex, especially when balancing modern building codes with historical authenticity." By lunchtime, Elizabeth had filled several pages of her notebook with observations and questions. We ate sandwiches from a local deli at a picnic table overlooking the mill pond, the autumn leaves reflecting in its still surface. "So, what do you think?" I finally asked. Elizabeth considered her answer carefully. It's more complex than I imagined. There are so many variables, so many competing priorities. Historical accuracy versus practical functionality, budget constraints versus quality craftsmanship. That's restoration in a nutshell, I agreed. It's never simply about preserving the past. It's about making the past viable in the present. Like you're trying to do with me, she said quietly, meeting my eyes directly for the first time that day. I didn't deny the parallel. Perhaps. We both know there's damage between us, Elizabeth. Some of it recent, some of it accumulated over years. The question is whether the foundational relationship is strong enough to restore. Her gaze dropped to her notebook. I'm still angry, you know. Not just about recent events, but about growing up with a mother who always seemed more interested in buildings than in her own daughter. The accusation stung, but contained enough truth that I couldn't dismiss it outright. After James died, I had indeed immersed myself in work, partly from financial necessity, but also as a refuge from overwhelming grief. Had I neglected Elizabeth's emotional needs while ensuring her material ones were met? Almost certainly. I won't claim I was a perfect mother, I acknowledged. After your father died, I was trying to keep us afloat financially and emotionally. I made mistakes. You were always gone, she continued, old resentment surfacing. Always at some job site or meeting with clients. You missed my school performances, my swim meets, and when you were physically present, your mind was usually somewhere else, solving some architectural problem or planning your next project. That's fair, I said, feeling the weight of her words. I was a single mother running a business in an industry that didn't easily accept women, especially those with family responsibilities. I made choices that prioritized our financial security, sometimes at the expense of being present for moments that mattered to you. Elizabeth seemed surprised by my admission. She'd clearly expected defensiveness. What I don't understand, I continued, is why you didn't just talk to me about your financial troubles. Why resort to legal maneuvers to take control of my assets? She flushed with embarrassment. I tried, Mother. 3 months ago, I asked if I could borrow against my inheritance to pay off some of the debt from the divorce. You lectured me about financial responsibility and suggested I live within my means, as if I were still a teenager mismanaging an allowance. I searched my memory and recalled the conversation, a brief phone call while I was reviewing contracts for the mill project. Had I really been so dismissive? Apparently so. I'm sorry I didn't listen properly, I said. But seeking guardianship, Elizabeth? Claiming I was mentally incompetent? That's quite a leap from being rebuffed for a loan. She looked away, watching Carlos's team carefully removing rotted sections of wood from the mill's facade. It wasn't my idea initially. Thomas's attorney suggested it during our final settlement negotiations. He said it was a common strategy when elderly parents were resistant to helping their children financially. Thomas's attorney, I repeated, anger flaring at the thought of my ex-son-in-law's continuing influence. And you didn't question the ethics of that approach? I was desperate, she admitted. The divorce left me with half the assets but most of the debt. My new position pays barely enough to cover rent, and yes, I know that's partly due to my own poor choices. Thomas convinced me to sign as a guarantor for his business loans, despite your warnings. I absorbed this information in silence. Elizabeth had indeed made poor financial decisions throughout her marriage to Thomas, ignoring my concerns about his business ventures and extravagant lifestyle. But I was equally guilty of saying, "I told you so," rather than offering constructive help when those decisions inevitably led to consequences. Well, I finally said, gathering our lunch debris, we both have things to work on, it seems. You need to rebuild your financial stability without resorting to unethical shortcuts, and I need to be more attentive when you reach out for help. Is that why you're giving me this job? She asked. Pity? No, I replied firmly. Reynolds, restoration genuinely needs someone with your financial background. The company has grown beyond what Margaret and I can manage alone. This is a business decision, not a maternal one. As if to emphasize my point, my phone buzzed with a message from Margaret about an urgent situation at another project site. Speaking of business, I said, scanning the message, we need to head to the Salem Courthouse restoration. There's an issue with the plaster contractor. The rest of the afternoon offered Elizabeth a crash course in the daily challenges of historical restoration. At the courthouse, we mediated a dispute between the plaster specialist I'd hired for his expertise with traditional lime techniques and the general contractor who wanted to use modern materials to save time. Elizabeth observed as I insisted on honoring the original specifications, explaining the long-term structural and aesthetic benefits that justified the additional expense and time. By 5 o'clock, when we finally returned to my house, Elizabeth looked physically and mentally exhausted, but also thoughtful. Your job is more demanding than I realized, she admitted as I unlocked the front door. It's not just about design or historical knowledge. You're constantly negotiating between competing interests, craftspeople, clients, historical commissions, modern building codes. That's why restoration requires patience, I replied, setting my briefcase on the antique hall table. Quick. Fixes almost always create bigger problems down the line. Elizabeth lingered in the foyer, clearly uncertain about her next move. The formal workday was over, but our personal issues remained largely unresolved. Would you like to stay for dinner? I offered. Nothing fancy, just some leftover chicken soup I made yesterday. She hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. In the kitchen, modernized with high-end appliances that complemented rather than clashed with the Victorian aesthetics, I reheated the soup while Elizabeth set the table, moving with the familiarity of someone who had grown up in this space, despite her long absence. I've been thinking about what you said at the mill, she began as we sat down to eat. About looking deeper than the surface to determine what's worth saving. I waited, giving her space to continue. I think I've spent most of my adult life focused on surfaces, appearances, status, possessions. Even my marriage to Thomas was more about projecting success than building something meaningful. She stirred her soup absently. When it all collapsed, I had nothing solid underneath to fall back on. Foundations matter, I agreed quietly, in buildings and in lives. How did you do it? She asked suddenly. After Dad died, how did you rebuild everything from scratch? The question transported me back to those dark months after James's funeral. The overwhelming bills, the business barely getting started, the well-meaning suggestions from family that I should sell the house and find a more suitable occupation for a widow with a young daughter. One day at a time, I answered honestly. I focused on the fundamentals, keeping a roof over our heads, food on the table, your education secure. I took on any project that would pay, even small repairs and consultations that barely covered costs. I learned everything I could about running a business. You never remarried, Elizabeth observed. Was that because of me? I shook my head. It was a choice, not a sacrifice. I dated occasionally, but never met anyone who matched your father's combination of intelligence, kindness, and respect for my work. And yes, I was careful about who I introduced into your life, but that wasn't the primary factor. We ate in companionable silence for a while, the tension between us not gone, but somewhat diminished. I'd like to make this work, Elizabeth finally said. The job, I mean. I know I have a lot to learn about restoration, but I think my financial background could be valuable to the company. It could, I agreed, if you're willing to approach it with humility and a genuine commitment to understanding our mission. And the other things between us? She asked hesitantly. The personal history, the resentments, the guardianship attempt? Those will take longer to restore, I said honestly. Trust, once damaged, requires careful repair with appropriate materials and techniques. Just like the mill. Elizabeth smiled faintly at my architectural metaphor. Always buildings with you. They're what I know, I shrugged. But perhaps we can both learn new languages for this reconstruction project. After dinner, Elizabeth helped clear the table before gathering her things to leave. At the door, she paused. "Thank you for today," she said, "for showing me your world instead of just shutting me out of it." 8 o'clock tomorrow, I reminded her. We'll be at the office reviewing the quarterly financials and project projections. Wear whatever you're comfortable in. After she left, I settled in my study with a glass of wine and the portfolio of another potential project, an abandoned textile mill in Lowell that the Historical Society wanted to convert into affordable housing. The challenges were significant: environmental remediation, modern safety requirements, budget constraints. But beneath the decades of industrial grime and neglect lay a structure of remarkable integrity, with stories worth preserving. As I studied the preliminary assessment photos, I reflected on the day's events. Elizabeth and I had taken a small step toward rebuilding our relationship, but the foundation needed careful evaluation. Which parts of our history were sound enough to build upon? Which damaged elements needed to be removed or replaced? And how could we incorporate new materials, new understanding, new boundaries, new respect, without compromising the essential character of our connection as mother and daughter? Restoration was never a quick or simple process. It required patience, expertise, and a willingness to discover unexpected challenges beneath the surface. Sometimes what appeared to be minor cosmetic damage revealed structural issues that demanded complete reconstruction. I made notes on the textile mill proposal, identifying key areas for investigation and preliminary budget considerations. Tomorrow would bring a different kind of challenge, introducing Elizabeth to the business operations of Reynolds Restoration and assessing her genuine capacity for the role I'd offered. The following morning, Elizabeth arrived at my office 15 minutes early, dressed in business casual attire and carrying the same leather messenger bag, now containing a laptop and what appeared to be several financial reference books. The Reynolds Restoration Office occupied the ground floor of a beautifully restored federal-style building on Salem's historic Essex Street. The space balanced preservation with functionality, original wide plank floors and exposed beams complemented by modern lighting and ergonomic workstations. The walls displayed before and after photographs of our most significant projects, alongside architectural drawings and historical documents that informed our work. Margaret greeted Elizabeth with professional courtesy, showing no sign of the concern she'd expressed privately about bringing my daughter into the business after the guardianship attempt. "I've prepared the financial reports you requested," she informed me, handing over a thick folder. "And the Salem Historical Commission called to confirm your presentation next week about the courthouse restoration." The morning unfolded with a comprehensive review of the company's financial position, current projects, outstanding invoices, operating expenses, and projections for the coming year. Elizabeth asked astute questions about cash flow management, project financing structures, and tax implications specific to historical preservation work. "You've maintained impressive profit margins despite the specialized nature of your services," she noted, studying the quarterly statements. "Most restoration companies struggle with cost overruns and timeline extensions." "That's because we build realistic expectations from the beginning," I explained. "We never promise what we can't deliver, and we educate our clients about the inherent uncertainties in working with historical structures." By lunchtime, Elizabeth had identified several areas where financial processes could be streamlined and potential tax advantages we hadn't fully leveraged. "The Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program underwent significant changes last year," she explained, pulling up IRS documentation on her laptop. "You're currently claiming 20% credits for certified historic structures, but there are additional state incentives that could be stacked with careful documentation and timing." As the day progressed, I observed a side of Elizabeth I hadn't seen before, or perhaps hadn't bothered to notice. Behind the polished exterior and sometimes entitled attitude was a genuinely intelligent woman with specialized knowledge that complemented my own expertise. Where I understood buildings, materials, and historical significance, she grasped financial structures, tax regulations, and business optimization. Late afternoon found us reviewing the business development pipeline, discussing potential projects and strategic growth opportunities. "You've focused primarily on public and nonprofit projects," Elizabeth noted. "Is that a deliberate choice?" "Partly mission-driven, partly practical," I replied. "Public projects often come with grants and tax incentives that make proper restoration financially viable. Private clients frequently want shortcuts that compromise historical integrity. But there's an untapped market in high-end residential restoration," she suggested. "Wealthy homeowners in places like Marblehead and Manchester by the Sea who want authentic historical homes but can afford to do things properly." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "We've done some residential work, but it's never been our primary focus." "It could diversify your revenue streams and provide more consistent cash flow between larger institutional projects," Elizabeth continued, warming to her analysis. "The profit margins would likely be higher as well." As she outlined a potential business development strategy for targeting this market, I found myself genuinely impressed. She had clearly done her homework, researching the competitive landscape and identifying a viable opportunity that aligned with our expertise and values. "That's worth exploring," I conceded when she finished her presentation. "Though we'd need to be selective about clients to ensure they share our commitment to authentic restoration." "Of course," she agreed. "The whole point would be finding clients who value quality and historical integrity and are willing to pay for it." At 5:30, as the workday drew to a close, I made a decision that surprised even me. "There's a dinner meeting tonight with the Danvers Historical Society about the mill project," I told Elizabeth. "Would you like to join us? It would be a good opportunity to understand how we balance stakeholder expectations with practical considerations." Her expression registered surprise, followed by cautious pleasure. "I'd like that very much." The dinner at a small restaurant near the mill site brought together key figures in the project: the Historical Society president, the environmental consultant, representatives from the State Preservation Office, and potential tenants for the completed spaces. Elizabeth observed the social dynamics carefully, speaking only when directly addressed, but demonstrating an impressive grasp of the financial aspects when the conversation turned to budgets and funding sources. "Your daughter has a keen mind for the business side of preservation," Miranda Jacobs, the Historical Society president, commented to me as the evening wound down. "Will she be taking a more active role in the company?" "We're exploring that possibility," I replied, noticing how Elizabeth straightened slightly at the implied vote of confidence. "She brings valuable expertise in financial management and strategic planning." Later, as we walked to our cars under a canopy of stars, Elizabeth broke the comfortable silence between us. "Thank you for including me tonight," she said. "I understand now why you've dedicated your life to this work. It's not just about buildings, it's about community, history, creating spaces that matter." "Yes," I agreed, pleased by her perception. "Restoration isn't preservation for its own sake. It's about giving the past a meaningful place in the present and future." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about restoration in a broader sense, about our relationship and how to rebuild it properly. I know I damaged the foundation with the guardianship attempt, and there were already cracks from years of misunderstanding and resentment." I studied my daughter's face in the dim light of the parking lot, seeing echoes of both James and myself in her features. The good news about restoration is that it's never too late to begin, as long as there's something worth saving at the core. "Is there?" she asked softly. something worth saving between us. I believe so, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. The structure needs work, certainly, but the foundation, the fact that you're my daughter and I'm your mother, that remains sound. Elizabeth nodded, seemingly satisfied with this architectural assessment of our relationship. I'll see you tomorrow then. 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock, I confirmed. We have a site visit at the Taylor House in Ipswich. Wear work clothes. We'll be examining some questionable structural elements in the attic. As I drove home through Salem's historic streets, past buildings that had weathered centuries of storms, fires, and neglect, I felt a cautious optimism about this new phase with Elizabeth. The guardianship attempt had been dismissed, but it had revealed deeper issues that might never have been addressed otherwise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, both professional and personal. Elizabeth would make mistakes as she learned the restoration business. I would need to balance being her employer and her mother. We would both need to navigate the damaged trust between us while building something potentially stronger than what had existed before. But tonight, at least, there was hope. The kind that comes from seeing beyond surface damage to the sound structure beneath, and making the commitment to restore what matters, no matter how daunting the project might seem. 3 weeks into Elizabeth's employment at Reynolds Restoration, we established a rhythm that surprised us both with its effectiveness. My daughter's financial acumen complemented my architectural expertise in ways I hadn't anticipated. She streamlined our accounting systems, renegotiated terms with suppliers, and identified tax incentives specific to historical projects that had previously gone unclaimed. For my part, I made a concerted effort to explain the philosophical underpinnings of preservation work, not just how we restored buildings, but why each decision mattered within the broader context of cultural heritage. The Taylor House in Ipswich had proven an excellent training ground. Built in 1762 by a prosperous shipbuilder, the Georgian structure featured distinctive architectural elements that had been obscured by well-intentioned but misguided improvements over the centuries. As we worked to uncover and restore its original character, Elizabeth gained hands-on experience with the meticulous, often painstaking nature of authentic restoration. "It's like archaeology," she remarked one afternoon as we carefully removed layers of wallpaper in what had once been the formal parlor, revealing hand-painted 18th century patterns beneath. Each layer tells a story about the people who lived here and what they valued. Exactly, I agreed, pleased by her observation. That's why we document everything, even the elements we don't preserve. They're all part of the building's evolution. The property's owner, a technology executive from Boston with a genuine appreciation for historical authenticity, had given us considerable latitude in our approach. Elizabeth had taken the lead in explaining the financial implications of various restoration options, creating detailed cost analyses that respected both the client's budget and the home's historical integrity. "Mr. Abernathy called this morning," Margaret informed me as I arrived at the office on a crisp October morning. "Judge Harriman wanted you to know the guardianship petition has been expunged from the records completely. No trace of it will appear in any public database." "That's good news," I acknowledged, accepting the stack of mail she handed me. "Has Elizabeth arrived yet?" "She's in the conference room reviewing applications for the project manager position. She's narrowed it down to 3 candidates and prepared a comparison analysis for your review." I paused, surprised by this initiative. We did indeed need another project manager to handle our expanding workload, but I hadn't expected Elizabeth to take ownership of the hiring process. In the conference room, Elizabeth had created a presentation board with the candidates' qualifications, portfolios, salary requirements, and availability. She looked up as I entered, a slight uncertainty crossing her face. "I hope you don't mind," she began. "I noticed the job posting has been open for nearly 2 months, and with the new projects we're considering, the position needs to be filled quickly." I studied her work, thorough, organized, and showing a clear understanding of the skills required for the role. "This is excellent, Elizabeth. Which candidate do you recommend? She pointed to the portfolio in the center. Jasmine Chen, MIT trained. Architect with 5 years of restoration experience in Boston. Her portfolio shows exceptional attention to detail, and she has experience with grant writing for preservation projects. Lydia's sister, I noted with interest. She would bring valuable perspective to our team. Let's schedule interviews. With all 3 next week, with Jasmine first. Elizabeth nodded, making a note in her planner. There's something else we should discuss, she continued. I've been reviewing our insurance coverage and found some concerning gaps, particularly regarding specialized restoration tools and historic materials in storage. She presented a detailed analysis of our current policies compared to restoration-specific coverage available through specialty insurers. The potential savings, combined with more comprehensive protection, made a compelling case for changing providers. This is precisely why I hired you, I said, genuinely impressed. Implementation approved. Work with Margaret to make the transition. Elizabeth's expression betrayed momentary surprise before settling into quiet satisfaction. 3 weeks ago, she had attempted to have me declared incompetent to manage my affairs. Now she was helping me protect the business I'd built, and I was acknowledging her valuable contributions. Neither of us had expected this outcome. The Danvers Mill meeting is at 11, she reminded me, gathering her materials. The environmental assessment came back with recommendations for LEED. Paint remediation in the East Wing. I've prepared cost projections for 3 removal methods, balancing historical preservation concerns with safety requirements and budget constraints. As she headed to her office, the small room adjacent to mine that had once stored architectural samples, I found myself experiencing an unexpected emotion, pride. Not just in her professional capabilities, which were considerable, but in her evident commitment to understanding the principles that had guided my career. She wasn't simply going through the motions of employment, she was engaging thoughtfully, with the complex balance of preservation, practicality, and fiscal responsibility. The morning passed quickly in preparations for the mill meeting. When it was time to leave, Elizabeth drove us to the site, navigating her modest sedan through narrow roads with the confidence of someone who had grown up in the area. The contrast with her previous luxury vehicles was stark, another adjustment she had made without complaint in her new financial reality. I've been thinking about approaching the Massachusetts Historical Commission about additional grant funding for the mill project, she said as we neared the site. Their sustainable preservation initiative aligns perfectly with our plans for geothermal heating and restored water wheel power generation. That's worth exploring, I agreed, though their application process is notoriously demanding. I've already downloaded their requirements and begun drafting the preliminary proposal, she replied. If you could review the technical specifications this weekend, I could have it ready for submission by Wednesday's deadline. I glanced at her profile, noting the determination in her expression. You're taking this very seriously. She slowed the car as we approached the mill entrance. Is that surprising? Somewhat, I admitted. I wasn't certain if this job was simply a temporary solution to your financial situation or a genuine career interest. Elizabeth parked and turned to face me. At first, it was the former, she acknowledged with refreshing honesty. But I've discovered something unexpected these past weeks. This work matters in a way my previous jobs never did. In financial services, I helped wealthy people become wealthier. Here, I'm contributing to something that will outlast me. Buildings that carry history forward and enrich communities. The sincerity in her voice touched me deeply. It echoed my own reasons for dedicating my life to restoration, the sense of purpose that came from preserving cultural heritage and creating spaces that connected past, present, and future generations. That's why I've stayed with it for 40 years, I told her. The financial success is satisfying, but the meaning is what sustains you through the challenges. The mill meeting proceeded productively, with Elizabeth presenting her remediation options with a clarity that impressed even the most technically oriented team members. She deferred appropriately to my expertise on preservation questions while confidently addressing budget implications and scheduling concerns. As we were leaving, Miranda Jacobs pulled me aside while Elizabeth conferred with the environmental consultant. "Your daughter is a revelation," the Historical Society president commented. "When you mentioned bringing her into the business, I had reservations, knowing her background was in corporate finance. But she's clearly inherited your attention to detail and commitment to doing things properly." "She's surpassed my expectations," I acknowledged, watching Elizabeth gesture animatedly as she discussed lead paint removal techniques. "She brings fresh perspective while respecting the fundamental principles of preservation." "Like mother, like daughter," Miranda observed with a knowing smile. "Though I imagine working together comes with its challenges." "We're navigating those day by day," I replied diplomatically. The truth was more complicated than I could express to Miranda. While our professional relationship had developed remarkably smoothly, the personal undercurrents remained treacherous. We had tacitly agreed to focus on work, leaving the deeper issues of trust and reconciliation largely unaddressed. The guardianship attempt hung between us, mentioned obliquely in moments of tension, but never directly confronted. That evening, as had become our custom on meeting days, we stopped for dinner at a small bistro halfway between the mill and Salem. These meals had evolved into informal debriefing sessions where we discussed project developments and planned next steps. Today, however, Elizabeth seemed distracted, picking at her salad with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Something on your mind?" I asked, setting aside my own meal. She looked up, then deliberately placed her fork on her plate. "I received a job offer yesterday. Senior financial analyst position at Wellington Management in Boston. The salary is nearly twice what you're paying me, plus benefits and potential bonuses." I felt a surprising pang of disappointment, but kept my expression neutral. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity. When would they want you to start?" "I haven't accepted," she said quickly. "I wanted to discuss it with you first." "Elizabeth, while I appreciate your professional courtesy, this is a personal decision. If corporate finance is where your heart lies—" "That's just it," she interrupted. "It isn't. Not anymore. The offer simply made me realize how much my priorities have shifted these past weeks." She took a deep breath. "I'd like to stay at Reynolds Restoration, but with some adjustments to my role and compensation." Now I was intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "A formal position as financial director with appropriate salary adjustment, though still below what Wellington offered," she began. "And I'd like to develop a specialty in financing complex restoration projects, not just for our firm, but potentially as a consultant to other preservation organizations facing funding challenges." Her proposal was thoughtful and aligned perfectly with our company's needs while offering her a clear growth trajectory. It would require additional training in preservation-specific financing mechanisms, but her quick mastery of tax incentives and grant requirements had demonstrated her aptitude for this specialized knowledge. "That's a substantial commitment to historical restoration as a career path," I observed. "Are you certain it's what you want?" Elizabeth nodded decisively. "I am. This work connects with me in ways I never anticipated. And," she added with a hint of vulnerability, "I'd like the chance to build something meaningful alongside you, if that's still possible after everything that's happened between us." The reference to our personal conflict hung in the air, impossible to ignore. For weeks, we had operated in a strange parallel existence, productive colleagues during business hours while carefully avoiding the deeper emotional terrain of mother and daughter. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room," I said quietly. "The guardianship petition." Elizabeth's shoulders tensed, but she nodded in agreement. "I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to bring it up once I'd—" proven my value to the company. That's not my intention, I assured her. Your professional contributions stand on their own merits. But if we're going to build a long-term working relationship, we need to resolve the personal breach of trust. I know, she acknowledged, and I've been trying to demonstrate through actions rather than words that I regret what I did, that I understand how deeply I violated your trust. Why didn't you simply come to me directly about your financial troubles? Even after I initially rebuffed you? I asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. Elizabeth considered her answer carefully. Pride, partly, fear of judgment, and honestly, years of assuming you'd prioritize principle over compassion. She paused. Our relationship has always been complicated. After Dad died, you became both parents, but somehow also more distant, consumed by work and responsibility. I never felt I could show weakness without disappointing you. Her words echoed painfully with my earlier reflections about the choices I'd made after James's death. I had indeed prioritized financial security and professional success, believing I was doing what was necessary for our survival. But in focusing so intently on providing for Elizabeth materially, had I failed to give her the emotional support she needed? I made mistakes, I admitted. I approached parenting like I approached restoration projects, with precision, focus, and clear objectives. But children aren't buildings. They need more than structural integrity and aesthetic harmony. Elizabeth's expression softened. And I made the mistake of never seeing the sacrifices behind your choices. I resented your absence without recognizing that you were working not just for professional fulfillment, but to ensure we could keep our home, that I could attend college without debt, that we could maintain the life Dad would have wanted for us. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding between us. Where do we go from here? She finally asked. Forward, I think, I replied. Professionally, your proposal makes sense for the company. We'll formalize your position as financial director with appropriate compensation and development opportunities. Personally, I hesitated, unused to navigating such emotional terrain. Perhaps we start with honesty and a commitment to direct communication, even when it's uncomfortable. I'd like that, Elizabeth said, and I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry for the guardianship attempt. It was misguided and hurtful, motivated by financial desperation, but inexcusable nonetheless. Thank you, I said simply. I accept your apology, and I offer my own for the times I've been unavailable or unsupportive when you needed me. We finished our meal in a different kind of silence, not tense or guarded, but thoughtful, and perhaps even hopeful. The reconciliation would take time, like any complex restoration project, but we had established a foundation upon which to build. The following Monday, I made Elizabeth's promotion official. The staff gathered in the conference room for a brief ceremony where I presented her with business cards bearing her new title, Financial Director, Reynolds Restoration. Margaret organized a small celebration with champagne and pastries from our favorite local bakery. A toast, I proposed, raising my glass, to Elizabeth Reynolds, whose financial expertise and fresh perspective are already strengthening our company's foundation. And to new beginnings, Elizabeth added, meeting my gaze with quiet significance. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. The Taylor House restoration uncovered remarkable original features beneath modern alterations, including hand-painted floor cloths that predated conventional carpeting and decorative plasterwork that had been concealed by dropped ceilings. Elizabeth negotiated with the Massachusetts Historical Society to document these discoveries, leveraging the publicity to attract potential clients interested in authentic restoration. At the Mill Project, Elizabeth's grant application succeeded beyond expectations, securing an additional $180,000 for the environmental remediation and sustainable energy components. The local newspaper featured a story about the project, prominently, mentioning the mother-daughter team leading the restoration. The accompanying photograph showed us examining architectural plans together, Elizabeth pointing to a detail while I nodded in agreement. An image of professional harmony that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. On a personal level, we began rebuilding our relationship with small but meaningful steps. Sunday dinners became a regular tradition, sometimes at my home, sometimes at Elizabeth's modest apartment. We shared meals, discussed books and films, and gradually ventured into more personal territory, her ongoing divorce proceedings, my occasional feelings of loneliness since James's death, her tentative steps toward dating again, my thoughts about eventual retirement. One Sunday evening in early November, as we sat in my living room with cups of hot cider after dinner, Elizabeth brought up a subject we had both carefully avoided. "I've been thinking about Thomas's role in the guardianship situation," she said, referring to her soon-to-be ex-husband. His attorney's suggestion wasn't random. Thomas knew about the Reynolds restoration assets and had been pressuring me for years to seek a larger share of the family business. I considered this information thoughtfully. While I had never particularly liked Thomas with his flashy manners and evident materialism, I had tried to maintain a cordial relationship for Elizabeth's sake. Learning of his behind-the-scenes manipulation added another dimension to the guardianship attempt. "Have you confronted him about this?" I asked. Elizabeth nodded. "Last week, during a settlement meeting. He didn't deny it, actually seemed proud of his strategic thinking, as he called it. He genuinely believed that because I'm your only child, I was entitled to control of the company regardless of my qualifications or your wishes." "And what did you tell him?" I was curious about how she now viewed this perspective, given her evolving appreciation for the business. "I told him that Reynolds Restoration was never about entitlement," she replied, surprising me with her vehemence. "It's about responsibility, to history, to craftsmanship, to community, that I was earning my place in the company through commitment and contribution, not simply claiming it through family connection." Her words mirrored the values I had tried to instill throughout my career, though I had perhaps failed to articulate them clearly within our family dynamic. Hearing Elizabeth express them now, with genuine conviction, touched me deeply. "Your father would be proud of that perspective," I told her. "He always believed that meaningful work was about contribution, not acquisition." "I wish I had known him better," Elizabeth said softly. "My memories are growing fainter. Sometimes I can't remember the sound of his voice." I rose and crossed to the mahogany secretary desk in the corner, unlocking a small drawer I rarely opened. From it, I removed a package wrapped in archival tissue paper. "I've been saving these for the right moment," I explained, returning to sit beside Elizabeth. "Perhaps that time is now." Inside the package were James's journals, leather-bound volumes spanning the years from our marriage through Elizabeth's early childhood. He had been a dedicated diarist, recording not just daily events but his thoughts, dreams, and reflections on fatherhood. "He wrote every evening," I told Elizabeth, whose eyes had widened at the sight of her father's distinctive handwriting. "Often about you, your first steps, words, the books he read to you, his hopes for your future." Elizabeth accepted the journals with trembling hands. "All these years, you never mentioned these." "At first, they were too painful to share," I admitted. "Later, they became a private connection to him that I selfishly kept for myself. But they belong to you as well, especially now that you're building your own relationship with his legacy through the business." She opened the earliest volume, dated the year of our marriage, and read the first entry silently. Her eyes filled with tears. "His description of your wedding day. It's so vivid, so full of love and hope." "He had a gift for seeing beauty in details others missed," I said. "It made him an excellent partner in restoration work. Even though his profession was teaching, he could envision how spaces had once been and could be again." We spent the rest of the evening with the journals, Elizabeth reading passages aloud while I shared corresponding memories. Through James's words, she reconnected with the father she had lost too young, while I rediscovered dimensions of my late husband that time had blurred. It was its own kind of restoration, recovering the past to enrich our present understanding. As Elizabeth prepared to leave that night, journals carefully packed in her bag to read at home, she embraced me. With unusual emotion, "Thank you for sharing him with me," she whispered. "And thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to do so." I held my daughter close, feeling the years of distance between us continue to diminish. "Some bonds can bend without breaking," I told her. "Like the timber frames in the mill, stressed but still structurally sound." She laughed softly at my inevitable architectural metaphor. "Always buildings with you." "Always," I agreed. "They're the language I know best." The following week brought a significant development in our business expansion. The Regional Preservation Society approached us about assessing 5 endangered historical properties in Essex County, with potential for comprehensive restoration projects that could span the next 3 years. The scope was larger than anything Reynolds Restoration had previously undertaken as a single initiative. This would require additional staff, expanded workshop facilities, and significant capital investment, Elizabeth noted as we reviewed the proposal in my office. But the financial projections are compelling, especially with the tax incentives and grant funding available for registered historical sites. I studied the property details thoughtfully. Each building represented a distinct architectural period and construction type, from an early colonial salt box to a Victorian Gothic revival church. The technical challenges would be considerable, but so would the opportunities for innovation and historical significance. "We'd need to hire that project manager immediately," I mused, "plus at least 2 more restoration specialists and an additional architect with preservation expertise." "I've already updated the hiring budget projections," Elizabeth confirmed. "And I've identified potential workshop space in the old cannery building. It's structurally sound and has the high ceilings we need for larger restoration elements." Her proactive approach no longer surprised me. In the months since joining the company, Elizabeth had developed an intuitive understanding of our operational needs alongside her financial responsibilities. She thought not just in terms of numbers, but in practical requirements for project execution. "What's your recommendation?" I asked, valuing her perspective. She considered the question carefully. "Strategically, this positions Reynolds Restoration as the premier preservation firm in New England. The projects are historically significant enough to attract national attention. Financially, the 5-year projections show substantial profit, potential with manageable risk. Logistically, it would stretch our resources, but with strategic hiring and your expertise guiding the technical approach, it's achievable." "And personally?" I pressed, wanting her complete assessment. Elizabeth smiled. "Personally, I think it would be the most meaningful work either of us has ever done. These buildings represent 3 centuries of New England history, the stories of ordinary people who built this region. Saving them matters." In that moment, I recognized something profound. Elizabeth had truly embraced the soul of restoration: work. Beyond the business calculations and career considerations, she had connected with the deeper purpose that had sustained my passion through decades of challenges. She understood that we weren't merely preserving old buildings. We were safeguarding cultural memory and community identity. "Then let's do it," I decided. "Draft an acceptance proposal with timeline and resource requirements. We'll present it to the Preservation Society next week." The look of excitement and determination on Elizabeth's face echoed what I had felt at similar pivotal moments in my career. The thrill of taking on work that would demand your best efforts and leave a lasting legacy. That evening, as I walked through my garden in the gathering twilight, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past several months. What had begun with the shock of a guardianship petition had evolved into a profound professional partnership and the healing of our fractured relationship. Elizabeth had found meaningful work aligned with her values, while I had gained both a capable successor and a reconnection with my only child. The garden itself was a metaphor for our journey, the careful pruning of dead growth allowing for new blossoms, the patient cultivation of perennial plants that returned stronger each season, the integration of heritage varieties with contemporary specimens, creating a landscape that honored the past while embracing the present. As I tended to a heritage rosebush that had once graced James's family home, I imagined him watching our story unfold. He would have appreciated the symmetry of Elizabeth finding her purpose through the very business her guardianship attempt had threatened. He had always believed in second chances and the human capacity for growth. The path forward remained partially uncharted. Elizabeth would face challenges in her new role, and our personal reconciliation would encounter inevitable setbacks as old patterns reasserted themselves. But we had established a foundation of honesty, respect, and shared purpose that gave me confidence in what we were building together. The judge's dismissal of the guardianship case had marked the end of one chapter in our story. What followed was proving far more significant than either of us could have imagined. Not just the preservation of my autonomy, but the restoration of a bond that had seemed beyond repair. Like the buildings we devoted ourselves to saving, our relationship had revealed unexpected strength beneath its damaged exterior, worthy of the painstaking work of restoration. Spring arrived in New England with its characteristic unpredictability, warm sunshine giving way to sudden frost, delicate blossoms persisting despite late snow. At the Danvers Mill site, the restoration had progressed remarkably. The main structure now stood proud against the sky, its timber frame reinforced, roof restored with historically accurate materials, and windows gleaming in the morning light. Inside, craftspeople applied traditional techniques to recreate the original character, while incorporating discrete modern systems for safety and accessibility. I walked the perimeter with Elizabeth, reviewing the detailed checklist for the upcoming phase, which would focus on the interior spaces and exhibit areas. In the 6 months since our decision to pursue the multi-property preservation initiative, Reynolds Restoration had grown significantly. We'd hired Jasmine Chen as project manager, added 4 skilled restoration specialists to our team, and expanded our workshop facilities in the renovated cannery building. Elizabeth had restructured our financial systems to accommodate the increased complexity, implementing project-specific accounting and enhanced cash flow management. The governor's office confirmed they'll attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Elizabeth informed me as we inspected the newly installed water wheel mechanism. Their press secretary requested talking points about job creation and educational impact. Make sure to emphasize the apprenticeship program, I suggested. 7 local residents learning traditional building crafts while earning living wages is precisely the economic development model they want to promote. Elizabeth nodded, making notes on her tablet. At 42, she had settled comfortably into her role as financial director, her corporate polish now complemented by practical knowledge of preservation techniques and historical significance. She moved through the site with confidence, greeting workers by name and demonstrating a genuine understanding of their specialized skills. Mr. Abernathy called this morning, she continued. The Taylor family has signed the conservation easement for their property. The restoration work is protected in perpetuity, regardless of future ownership changes. That's excellent news, I replied, feeling the satisfaction that came with securing a building's legacy beyond our immediate intervention. They've made the right choice for the property and the community. We completed our inspection and returned to my car for the drive back to Salem. As I navigated the winding roads, Elizabeth reviewed our afternoon appointments, a meeting with potential donors for the Gothic Revival Church project, a conference call with the State Historical Commission, and interviews for an additional administrative position to support our expanded operations. Have you given more thought to the succession planning proposal? she asked carefully as we neared the office. The board meeting is next week, and they'll expect a timeline. The question touched on a subject we had been circling for months. At 68, I remained actively engaged in every aspect of Reynolds Restoration, but the company's growth demanded consideration of long-term leadership. Elizabeth's performance as financial director had exceeded all expectations, establishing her as a natural candidate to eventually assume broader responsibilities. "I've drafted a 5-year transition plan," I told her, "with incremental shifts in authority and a structured knowledge transfer process. You'll see the details before the board presentation." Elizabeth absorbed this information quietly. "And you're comfortable with the direction?" I glanced at her briefly before returning my attention to the road. "It's the right approach for the company's future. You've earned the opportunity through genuine commitment and demonstrated ability. That means a great deal coming from you," she said softly. Our relationship had evolved significantly since the guardianship attempt nearly a year ago. The initial wariness had given way to professional respect, which had gradually expanded to include personal reconciliation. We still had moments of tension when old patterns reasserted themselves, but we had developed healthier communication strategies and a deeper appreciation for each other's perspectives. At the office, the afternoon unfolded with the organized intensity typical of our expanded operation. The meeting with potential donors for the church restoration went exceptionally well, with Elizabeth presenting a compelling financial analysis alongside my historical and architectural assessment. Her ability to translate preservation values into practical investment terms had proven invaluable in securing support from diverse funding sources. The day concluded with a staff gathering to celebrate the completion of the Taylor House project. Photographs of the restored property were displayed on large monitors, showing the dramatic transformation from neglected colonial structure to vibrant historical home. The owner had invited local school children to tour the property, creating educational materials about early American building techniques and daily life. "This exemplifies our mission," I told the assembled team. "Not just preserving buildings, but making history accessible and relevant to future generations." As champagne was served and conversations flowed around the office, I found myself standing, slightly apart, observing the community we had built. Reynolds Restoration had grown from my solitary vision into a collective endeavor involving dozens of skilled professionals united by shared values. It was a legacy that would outlast my individual contribution. Elizabeth approached with 2 glasses, offering one to me. "Penny for your thoughts?" "I was just reflecting on how much has changed," I admitted. "When I started this company after your father died, I never imagined it would grow to this scale or significance." She followed my gaze around the room. "You've built something remarkable." "We've built something remarkable," I corrected gently. "Your contributions over the past year have been transformative." Elizabeth smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that reminded me powerfully of James. "Speaking of transformation, I've been meaning to tell you, I finally finished reading Dad's journals. The last entry was written just 3 days before his heart attack." "I remember," I said softly. "He was planning your birthday celebration. 10 years old. Double digits, as he kept saying." "He wrote about his hopes for my future," Elizabeth continued. "How he wanted me to find work that brought me joy and purpose, not just financial success." She looked around at our colleagues. "I think he would be pleased with where I've landed, though the path was more circuitous than he might have imagined." "He would be very proud," I agreed. "As am I." The simple acknowledgement, something I had perhaps too rarely expressed during her earlier life, brought a flush of pleasure to Elizabeth's face. Our complicated history couldn't be erased, but we were writing new chapters that honored the underlying connection while establishing healthier patterns. The following week, I presented the succession plan to Reynolds Restoration's Board of Directors. The proposal outlined a graduated transition of leadership responsibilities over 5 years, with Elizabeth assuming the role of Chief Operating Officer immediately and potentially advancing to Chief Executive Officer as I stepped back to a strategic advisory position. This approach ensures continuity of our mission and values while leveraging Elizabeth's demonstrated strengths in financial management and strategic planning, I explained, addressing the questions and concerns raised by board members. The extended timeline allows for comprehensive knowledge transfer and preserves client relationships through managed transition. The board approved the plan unanimously, with several members expressing particular appreciation for the detailed implementation strategy and clear milestones. Elizabeth, who had presented the financial projections portion of the proposal, accepted the board's congratulations with graceful professionalism. After the meeting, we walked together through Salem's historic district, passing buildings that Reynolds Restoration had helped preserve over the decades. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across Federal-style facades and colonial doorways, highlighting architectural details that connected the present to centuries past. "Are you certain about this timeline?" Elizabeth asked as we paused. Before an 18th-century merchant's home that had been one of my first major restoration projects. 5 years is a substantial commitment at this stage of your career. "It's the right approach," I assured her. "Too abrupt a transition would unsettle client relationships and disrupt ongoing projects. Besides, I'm not ready for complete retirement, just a gradual rebalancing of responsibilities." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your confidence. In me, especially given our history. Not every mother would entrust her life's work to a daughter who once tried to have her declared incompetent." Her direct reference to the guardianship attempt, something we now occasionally acknowledged with a frankness that would have been impossible months ago, reflected how far we had come in rebuilding trust. Not every daughter would prove her worth so thoroughly after such an inauspicious beginning, I replied with equal candor. "You've earned this opportunity through genuine commitment and demonstrated ability, not through family connection." We continued our walk, discussing specific aspects of the transition plan and identifying areas where focused mentoring would be beneficial. Elizabeth's background in finance gave her natural advantages in business operations, while she still had much to learn about architectural assessment and preservation philosophy. "I've enrolled in the Historic Preservation Certificate program at Boston Architectural College," she informed me. "Evening classes starting next month. I'll never match your expertise, but I want to strengthen my technical understanding beyond what I've picked up through observation." The initiative impressed me, another demonstration of her serious commitment to the field we now shared. "That's an excellent program. Several of their faculty are preservation advocates I've worked with over the years." As we neared my home, Elizabeth hesitated. "There's something else I wanted to discuss, related to the succession plan but more personal." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "I'm considering buying a house," she said. "Something historic, with good bones but needing thoughtful restoration. A project I could work on gradually, applying what I've learned through the company." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," I encouraged. "Any specific properties in mind?" "Actually, yes." She looked slightly nervous. "The Whitman Cottage on Chestnut Street just came on the market. It's a Federal period structure, circa 1810, with original woodwork, but requiring significant updates to systems and some structural reinforcement." I knew the property well, a charming example of early 19th century domestic architecture that had been in the same family for generations. "That's an ambitious undertaking, but entirely manageable with the right approach. The location is excellent, walking distance to both the office and my home." "That proximity was a factor in my interest," Elizabeth admitted. "As we implement the succession plan, being nearby would facilitate our collaboration, and..." She hesitated again. "I thought it might be nice for us to have regular family dinners and perhaps work on smaller restoration elements together, outside of the company context." The suggestion touched me deeply. After years of strained relations and recent months of careful rebuilding, Elizabeth was proposing a future that included regular family connection alongside our professional partnership. It represented a healing I had hoped for but hadn't dared expect. "I'd like that very much," I told her, "and I'd be happy to consult on your restoration plans, though I promise not to impose my preferences unless invited." She laughed. "I'll definitely seek your expertise, especially for the original windows. The listing mentioned they're intact but need considerable repair. Windows are among the most important character-defining elements of a historical home," I began, then caught myself falling into a technical lecture. "But we can discuss that when you're ready. Have you secured financing?" "I'm meeting with the bank tomorrow. The divorce settlement is finally complete, so I have some capital for the down payment, and my credit has recovered since stabilizing my finances." I considered offering financial assistance, but held back, respecting Elizabeth's evident desire to manage this investment independently. She had worked diligently to rebuild her financial foundation, just as she had our relationship. The restoration of the Whitman cottage would represent another step in her journey of personal and professional growth. "Let me know how the bank meeting goes," I said instead, "and if you decide to make an offer, I'd be happy to accompany you on a detailed inspection." 2 weeks later, Elizabeth's offer on the Whitman cottage was accepted. The property inspection revealed significant but manageable issues: old electrical systems, a roof needing replacement, and structural settling that required expert attention. None of these deterred Elizabeth, who approached the project with the same methodical planning she brought to her work at Reynolds Restoration. "I'm thinking of documenting the entire restoration process," she mentioned as we examined the property after closing. "Not just for personal records, but potentially as an educational resource for homeowners considering historical preservation rather than modernization." "That's an excellent idea," I encouraged. "The most common obstacle to proper restoration is lack of information about appropriate techniques and materials. A well-documented case study could be invaluable." Elizabeth moved into the cottage's habitable rooms while beginning work on the others, prioritizing structural issues and safety concerns. She hired several craftspeople from our trusted network, but took on many tasks herself, developing practical skills to complement her theoretical knowledge. Each Sunday, she would show me her progress during our regular family dinners, proudly displaying restored moldings or carefully stripped paint layers that revealed original finishes. As summer approached, the succession plan at Reynolds Restoration was proceeding smoothly. Elizabeth officially assumed the Chief Operating Officer role, taking responsibility for day-to-day operations, while I focused on strategic initiatives and complex preservation challenges. Our complementary skills created a natural division of responsibilities that served both the company and our individual strengths. The Essex County Preservation Initiative continued to expand, with additional historical properties identified for potential restoration. Reynolds Restoration was now recognized nationally as a leader in authentic preservation practices, attracting clients and craftspeople from across the country. Articles in architectural and historical publications highlighted our innovative approaches to balancing historical authenticity with contemporary functionality. On a warm June evening, as we sat on the newly restored porch of Elizabeth's cottage, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past year. What had begun with a devastating betrayal, a daughter attempting to have her mother declared incompetent, had evolved into a relationship stronger and more authentic than anything we had previously known. The crisis had forced us to confront long-standing issues and misunderstandings, creating space for genuine reconciliation and growth. "I've been thinking about Judge Harriman," Elizabeth said, interrupting my thoughts. "How differently things might have turned out if he hadn't dismissed the guardianship case." "He made the right legal decision based on the evidence," I noted. "My competence was never truly in question." "No, but the case could have dragged on if he'd been less perceptive." Or more susceptible to the arguments Thomas's attorney was prepared to make, she countered. We might have become permanent adversaries rather than reaching this point of reconciliation. I considered her perspective thoughtfully. Perhaps, but I prefer to believe we would have found our way to understanding eventually. The foundations were always there, just obscured by years of miscommunication and unaddressed hurts. Elizabeth smiled at my inevitable architectural metaphor. Always buildings with you. They're consistent in ways people rarely are, I replied lightly. A sound structural system will withstand considerable stress if the essential elements remain intact. Like our relationship, she suggested. Damaged, but not destroyed. Exactly. And now thoughtfully restored, with appropriate techniques and materials. We sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened, watching fireflies begin their evening dance above the garden Elizabeth had started revitalizing. The cottage, like our relationship, was a work in progress. Some areas beautifully restored, others still requiring attention, the whole gradually becoming something that honored its history while serving present needs. In the distance, church, bells chimed the hour, their sound carrying across Salem's historic district, where generations had built, preserved, and adapted structures that connected past to present. My life's work had been dedicated to ensuring these physical links to history endured. Now, in ways I could never have anticipated, that mission had expanded to include rebuilding the bond with my daughter, creating a legacy of both professional accomplishment and personal reconciliation. The guardianship case that might have torn us apart permanently had instead become the catalyst for genuine healing. Judge Harriman's dismissal, based on recognition of my competence and accomplishments, had opened the door to a future neither Elizabeth nor I could have imagined in those tense days of confrontation. I'm glad you stayed, I told Elizabeth softly, as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Not just at the company, but in my life. She reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. So am I, though the path was more complicated than either of us would have chosen. The most valuable restorations usually are, I replied. It's the challenges that make the achievement meaningful. As night settled fully over Salem, we continued our conversation, discussing projects and possibilities, sharing ideas and aspirations. The restored porch of the historic cottage bearing witness to the reconstructed relationship between mother and daughter, both now dedicated to preserving what mattered most, in buildings and in life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.